Who is the greatest? That's the question that our scripture today deals with. Of course, that's a really popular question culturally for us. Who is the GOAT? Who is the greatest of all time? Is it LeBron James or is it Michael Jordan? As a child growing up, watching MJ play on the court and win championships, when I got on the court, I wanted to be just like Mike. So that meant when I would go to practice layups, I wouldn't just practice banking the ball off the backboard and into the hoop. I would practice banking the ball off the backboard into the hoop with my tongue out. Or like Michael Jordan used to do, he would go up to the hoop and then underneath the hoop and scoop the ball up and under. And so when I'd practice layups, I would practice the up and under moves. For me, MJ was the greatest on the court, and I wanted to be just like him. It seemed like there wasn't any game or any competition that he could not bend to the power of his will. He was bigger, stronger, he could jump higher, and he was more dominant than the people that he played against. The championships and the MVPs stacked up, and an entire generation wanted to be just like Mike. And that is what the world calls greatness: dominance, power, and status. But in our scripture today, Jesus flips that. We'll see from the words of Jesus that in God's kingdom, true greatness isn't power, it's actually service. We're in a focus right now called Everyday Life on Mission. And during this focus this fall, we are going through a number of different practices. Recently, we've been prayer walking our neighborhoods, the practice of prayer walking. But the practice that we're in right now is the practice of service. Greatness in service is not heroic headline stuff. It's not going to make the SportsCenter top 10. It's not going to be a viral clip. What we're going to do and what we're engaging with in our house churches and with our neighbors in the acts of service, it's quiet, it's humble, and it's in the flow of everyday life. When you practice service, you're invited into the paradox that Jesus describes in this passage. It's that you discover greatness not by building yourself up, but by giving yourself away. True greatness is service. So in the same way that a kid in the late 90s wouldn't stumble into greatness on a basketball court, but would emulate the greatest player, would practice dribbling, would practice shooting, that is how we find greatness with God. We emulate Jesus himself, and we do that by putting into practice the things that he taught and modeled. And so that means service for us and greatness in the kingdom will take practice. The practice of service. It's not something that we do just once in a while or just this fall. It's a practice that we're experimenting with in a somewhat mechanical way right now so that it could become natural for each of us into the future. We want service not just to be a practice in a moment, but to be a lifestyle. So as we engage the practice of service this fall, you can expect to grow in kingdom greatness in 3 ways. And we're going to find those ways here in our passage. Let's dive in. First, in today's scripture, we see James and John's mother bowing before Jesus and asking that her sons would sit on the right and on the left of Jesus' throne when the kingdom is established in power here on earth as it is in heaven. Now, this is no casual request, because in ancient kingdoms, those who sat on the right and the left of the king were given the greatest amount of power, the greatest amount of authority, and the greatest amount of control. They were in the order of co-rulers with the king at the top of the chain. They had the most authority. So what she was asking for her sons, James and John, was not just greatness, but power. So when the other disciples heard about her request, they, of course, were angry. I think I would be angry, understandably angry. And to calm down their anger, Jesus responds to his disciples by saying this. You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. But not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave. So in culture, greatness equals status, followers, and control. But with Jesus, greatness equals lifting others up, serving them, becoming their servant, and dignifying those who would otherwise be overlooked. Practicing the Way right now is in a service of practice. They're releasing it this fall. And they've defined service like this, and I like this definition. They say service is the expression of Christ-like love through meeting the practical needs of another. You can think about your house church as a little kingdom outpost. I love house church because it flips the script in the same way that Jesus does. It removes the stage and the microphones and the lights, and it puts us all around the table. And it's a place where true greatness is found through service. There is no opportunity to gain power and control through the power mechanisms of the world. They're just not there. You'll notice that the people who seem to have the most authority in your house church are oftentimes those who serve the most extremely, those who give themselves away the most for the life of the community. It's the people who host and who lead and who on Wednesday night at 10 p.m. are thinking about who's going to serve communion the upcoming Sunday, and they're sending out texts and they're coordinating kids and they're looking after the needs of the other people in their community. That's because they have built relational trust, and it's relational authority within the house church that determines who is the leader, who is the greatest. It is the act of service. So greatness in house church looks more like serving others in hidden ways than it looks like having the best comment in a group discussion. The practice of service meets others' practical needs, and that can start right in your house church. As you assist with the gatherings, as you assist in hosting, as you assist your house church leaders, as you gravitate to serve and to meet the needs of the people in your community, greatness in house church begins with service. Point number 2. This is my favorite verse from the passage. I'm going to read it here for us. Jesus says, in referring to himself, "The Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life away as a ransom for many." So as a kid, emulating Michael Jordan on the basketball court, I thought would lead to basketball greatness. Spoiler, it didn't, but that was my hope. In the same way that emulating him on the court could lead to basketball greatness, we can emulate Jesus himself to enter into kingdom greatness. Jesus was a servant. He put away his right to be served to actually serve others. And there's no one more worthy of being served than Jesus. He is God himself, the creator of the universe, the maker of all the hundreds of thousands or millions of stars, the vastness of the cosmos. He's the one who intricately has woven together each one of our DNA. He's the only person who came and served perfectly in selfless love. If there's anyone that we owe a debt to, it would be Jesus himself. But he said, I didn't come to be served. Whoa. So he gave up his right to be served to actually serve us. Jesus was a servant. We see this all throughout the stories in the Gospels. Every person he encountered, in some way, he served. And of course, there is no greater act of service than Jesus' self-sacrifice on the cross on our behalf. Maybe you've heard this before. This phrase rings true to me in this teaching today, when it's been said that on the cross, Jesus paid a debt he did not owe because we owed a debt we could not pay. In our sin, we could not serve God in perfection. We could not repay what we owed God to be in relationship with him. And so Jesus came and on the cross committed the greatest act of self-sacrifice and service for us that has ever been committed in human history so that our debt would be paid and we could come to know God. Service wasn't just something Jesus did on the side. It was the very way he loved and lived out his mission. When we serve, we join Jesus on his mission. We talked about Matthew 25 a couple of weeks ago, where Jesus said, "Those who you fed, clothed, gave a drink of water, visited when they were sick or in prison, for each one that you served in those ways, it was as if you served me." When we serve others and meet their practical needs, we join Jesus in his mission and we join him in his lifestyle of service. Third point, service doesn't just do something for others, it actually grows something within ourselves. When I practiced basketball, it produced certain traits and characteristics within me. When I pressed through tough moments on the court to persevere and to make it through times of exhaustion, to continue on in competition, or when I worked out problems with my teammates, it grew certain traits within me. I developed the trait of perseverance. I developed teamwork and work ethic and grit and determination. Very, very valuable characteristics to have in life. And in the same way that practicing something like basketball develops traits in a person, so practicing service develops certain traits, godly traits, characteristics within us. Just 2 chapters before our passage today, in Matthew 18, we find a parallel teaching of Jesus, where he talks about greatness. These are separated by about a chapter and a half, our passage today and this one, but they're intended to be parallel, and they're connected to one another in the theme and how Jesus talks. In Matthew 18, Jesus welcomes a child, and he sits the child on his lap, and to his disciples, he says this, "Truly I say to you, unless you turn and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven." Jesus uplifts childlikeness as a trait of those who are the greatest in the kingdom. So we know that the practice of service produces childlikeness, which Jesus tells us explicitly here is humility. The practice of service produces childlikeness, which is actually humility. We live in a narcissistic, anxiety-driven age where we are stuck in doom scrolls of futility on social media. We are always concerned and caught up in a brain space of how others look and how we live up to that image. Service pulls us out of that brain space, focuses our eyes on the needs of others, gets us out of our own heads and our own demands, and into the act of loving the people around us. Service, in producing childlike humility, is nothing short of mental, emotional, and soulful liberation. C.S. Lewis put it this way: humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less. When we commit ourselves to the practice of service, then childlike humility will spring up in our soul, and it will feel like liberation. And to bring this home, I want to contrast the people we often uphold as great in the kingdom to how Jesus talks about kingdom greatness in this passage. I want to do that by contrasting Christian influencers with Christian saints. We can all name Christian influencers, Christian celebrities. And sometimes I worry that the Christians we behold and uplift actually distort our vision of what growth in God should look like. We're tempted to see large platforms and budgets and microphones and exclusive lifestyles as the end of discipleship. Who we admire in our faith will determine our vision for kingdom greatness. So who are we beholding and uplifting as our models in the faith? And how did they earn that status in our minds? I want us to really critically think about that. Do the people we admire as Christians, who we see as great in the kingdom, are they great in the ways that Jesus lays out in our passage today? For centuries, the heroes of the faith were not those who earned their status through worldly influence, but who were given veneration because of their life of sacrifice. These are the people who we call saints. People like Saint Francis of Assisi, or Saint Nicholas, or Saint Teresa of Calcutta. Each one of them were given a status of saint because of the ways they sacrificed worldly power to serve lost people and people in the margins of society. They weren't venerated for their success, but for their sacrifice. They were recognized not for worldly power, but for kingdom greatness. Saints are known for service. One saint in particular has stood out to me as I prepared for this teaching. And it's a lesser-known saint, someone by the name of Saint Pier Giorgio Frassati, classic Italian name. Pier Giorgio Frassati was an energetic Italian university student in the early 1900s. And by all accounts, he was a normal person who lived in the natural flow of everyday life. He was an average young man. He enjoyed mountain climbing, practical jokes, and late-night conversations with friends. Beneath his ordinary joyful youth, Pierre lived with extraordinary compassion. He quietly, and without the people around him knowing, gave away his money, his meals, and even his clothes to the poor people in his city of Turin. He was from a well-to-do family and often would slip away from the social gatherings of high society to visit the sick or deliver food, never drawing attention to himself or to his service. People in the upper classes had no idea that this was occurring with his life, that he would go as far as take the money given to him by his parents in his trust fund and giving it all away to people of need in the city. And when he tragically died of polio at just the age of 24, thousands of the city's poor, whom his wealthy family had never met, lined the streets to honor the young man who had secretly sacrificed for them. Who do we look up to in our faith? Are they worthy of emulation? Are they great in the kingdom by Jesus' standards? I want us to imagine a church not known for its brand influence, but for its kingdom greatness, for its lifestyle of sacrifice. I want us to imagine Awakening not known by its viral moments or by its filling of stadiums, but by everyday people being awakened to the needs around them and going and serving those needs in the natural flow of everyday life. That we would look back on this time at the end of our lives and think, I cannot believe all that God did for the sake of others in what otherwise felt like an incredibly normal moment of life. What would it look like to stand in retrospect and to see the fruit of hidden service and to think, God used our lives for the work of awakening? This is the church I want to belong to. This is a vision for Awakening worth giving our lives away because it's the vision of kingdom greatness that Jesus himself lived out, the practice of service. So join us this fall. Go all in. Pocket the reasons you have not to give yourself away. And for a minute and a moment, sacrifice to engage the practice of service to meet the practical needs of the people around you. You just may find a liberation of humility. You just may find Jesus in your everyday life. You just may find God awakening your neighbors, your classmates, and your family to the reality of Jesus. So, join us in the practice of service this fall. Where will you reach and who will you serve? Thanks, and God bless.